Hi everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alison Unsted and I'm the Chief Executive of MindForward Alliance. For those of you who are not familiar with us as an organisation, we're a non-profit born out of business. MindForward Alliance was started in 2012 when leaders across the City of London wanted to break the stigma around mental health in professional working environments. Since then, we've grown into a global alliance working with major businesses across sectors to help create cultures where people can thrive. Now, the way we work is pretty distinctive. Everything we do is evidence-based, designed with and for business, and tailored to regional contexts. We help businesses to build resilience, psychological safety, and high-performing teams through smarter strategies, insights, and action. Now, the evidence for what we do is clear. Companies who prioritise employee wellbeing and embed this into their workplace strategies deliver a more resilient, engaged and high-performing workforce and a more productive and valuable and profitable business. Yet despite the evidence, mental ill health is now the most common cause of work-limiting conditions in adults aged 44 and under. Only 57% of employees globally report being in good holistic health, and more than 1 in 5 employees are experiencing symptoms of burnout, making them 3 times more likely to quit their jobs. And just 21% of employees strongly agree that their employer cares about their well-being. In our own global insights research published last year, the key findings were that 1 in 2 of us were experiencing mental ill health symptoms. Where heads of organisations spoke openly about mental health, 3/4 of employees were more likely to discuss issues with their managers compared to 41% when they don't. When managers are well equipped, feelings such as lack of interest, motivation and energy are reduced, as well as the desire to quit. Now, even though these findings recognise the importance of line managers in influencing employee wellbeing, only 41% of line managers had received any training. Now, we also know that certain demographics are more impacted by mental ill health, and that's for a number of reasons. And one of these groups is our younger generations, our early careers cohorts. Deloitte's early careers research suggests that a high proportion, over 40% of Gen Z and millennials, are feeling stressed and anxious most of the time. This research also points to the important role a line manager can play in supporting less stress and anxiety in the workplace. Now, your people need to be well to thrive in the workplace, and employers have the opportunity there to create the right conditions. It's about creating an environment of sustainable high performance, and line managers play a key role in this, which is why we're focusing on today's session. So why are line managers so important? Well, line managers are the direct link between your organisation and your employees. They set the tone for the working environment and the day-to-day experience of the team. They can influence ways of working. They have a key role in maintaining and creating a kind of positive working relationships across the team and opportunities for social connection. And they can also be the role models for healthy workplace behaviours. Now, we spend over 1/3 of our time at work. And again, line managers can play a really important role in recognising the signs if a member of their team is struggling. Now, to get this right and to know where to start, I would just like to reference our Thriving at Work framework. Now, this is essentially a blueprint for organisations to use in developing their approaches. Standard 5 within the framework focuses on the role of the line manager. And in terms of how to get this right, we want to see that organisations are providing their managers with the guidance, tools and resources. Now, this will include the provision of awareness and skills-based training that is specific to the role of the line manager. So thinking about the people processes that line manager will be involved in. But it's also about how to build the confidence of those line managers to have good conversations with their teams about mental health, and also to be able to support and signpost their teams to support that is available through the organisation. We want organisations to encourage line managers to have regular conversations with their teams about workplace wellbeing, including psychosocial risks. And ultimately, we want to see that organisations make this a more formal requirement of the line manager role. Now, we used to talk about soft people skills, and it was, you're lucky if your line manager was good at people management. But in today's turbulent world, those soft people skills have never been more important. And to get this right and to make this a more formal requirement, it's about looking at how you build team wellbeing into the competency frameworks of line managers, how you measure this through performance reviews, and ultimately how you build this into your reward and compensation frameworks. So that's enough from me. I think this is a great time for me to introduce our panel today, and I'm delighted to be joined by Jyoti Choitram, Senior Wellbeing Manager at law firm A&O Shearman, and Jaan Madan, Senior Training Consultant at MindForward Alliance. Now, this is a session that's going to be very much focusing on the kind of practical, the what businesses need to do. And Jyoti and Jaan will be sharing some really good examples of what works well in practice. Now, there will be some time for questions at the end, so please do pop those questions in the Q&A box. So lovely, welcome to you both. How are you doing this morning?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, Alison.
Very well,
You're
thank
very
you.
welcome. So Jyoti, if I could come to you first, kind of conversations, experiences, or data that led your firm to think strategically about the development of your line managers.
Yeah, I mean, Alison, you did a great job of giving all the data points, which we probably looked at kind of probably not as cohesively as you have, but essentially it's that, and knowing that our line managers play a key role in the well-being of our people. And I think, you alluded to it, but we know that it's, not a skill for some people, it's a skill that comes naturally and it's quite organic. Whereas for some people, actually, they may not kind of think that way, they're not that way inclined. And so actually, but it's a learnt skill. So it's the opportunity to give them the opportunity to learn that skill. So I think that's kind of thinking behind it. So really in response to what you said. And I think the other point is around developing, and we're a global law firm and we have a number of offices across the network, and it's developing that consistency across language, and internally, and mental health literacy, so for people to have the ability to kind of talk about this in a way that feels comfortable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you make a really good point there around, learnt skills, because, there are people who are, find this quite uncomfortable, and discussing mental health and wellbeing in the workplace, for some comes very naturally and for others doesn't. And it shouldn't be the luck of the draw, should it, for teams in terms of who they get. So, I think that's a really important point. And that sort of brings me nicely onto my question for you, Jaan, which is around those skills and behaviours. And I mean, just in your experience, I mean, what would you say are the behaviours that line managers need to kind of get this right?
Well, I think sort of building on Jyoti's point, it's really important that we know that this is skills we can all develop. And I think however confident or competent we think we are, there's always an opportunity to develop. So there's a growth cycle to this as well. And I think the other point that Jyoti was making around consistency is really important as well, so that we know that we can create a baseline level that reflects the skills and the knowledge of our line managers. I think we need to apply the same business rigor that we would to any other agenda here at work. If we want to create the outcomes and the outputs that we're looking for, then we need to apply our same business thinking, our same acting, our same resourcing, our same planning, metrics, and so on and so forth. So I think that's an important part of it. And I'm sure we'll loop back round to that later when we talk more about the sort of strategic perspective. I think seeing the value in this and understanding the business case and echoing what Jyoti was saying, you did a great job there, Alison, of laying out the reasons why. And there's a people agenda to this. There's our reputation and the retention of talent, and there's also the commercial aspect to it as well. And I think understanding what's driving us is important, and then having some really clear boundaries around what we would like our people to understand about us as line managers, how we can support and develop and help, but also what those expectations are and how we can empower individuals to take that on for themselves as well. And then the last thing is really simple. It's just around sharing resource and good knowledge. We can model that behavior for ourselves. If we're saying to people it's important to look after our mental health because that drives high performance and sustainable high performance, and then we run around drinking coffee and shouting at everyone, it's, the two don't sit together. So we need to model good behavior and how particularly particularly in a challenging environments and high pressured environments, as well as just being able to create an environment where we share. But at the heart of it is the line manager isn't the gatekeeper. What they can do is enable their team to be empowered and take this agenda on, rather than everything having to channel through them.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And again, you make a really good point there around, I suppose, the value of this and the return on investment. And I know, organizations invest a huge amount in the recruitment and the development of their people. And ultimately, that's a wasted investment, in my view, if you're not going to invest in keeping people well, which is why, it's encouraged and why we build into our frameworks the need to help managers to get this right. So I suppose following on from that, Jyoti, in terms of what you have done as a firm, perhaps you could share a little bit around the kind of specific initiatives and training programs that you've introduced for your line managers.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think kind of there's a number of things we've done, but to start with the kind of the work we've done with you in terms of the training suite we've offered. So we kind of thought about what kind of training we have on offer for our offices globally, and actually, we kind of almost shifted from offices kind of, they can still do what they want and engage with local training and make sure that's covered, but actually wanted to have like a core offering that anyone anywhere could engage in. And so we developed that in terms of 3 options for training. So one was just kind of the 90-minute essentials, so really, just to learn a little bit more about what we talk about mental well-being. We focused in on a people manager session, which was 3 hours long, and so kind of a halfway, and then the kind of ally or champion training. The people manager one was quite new for us, and we were kind of pleasantly surprised by our engagement and enrollment in that. I think what it showed us is the people who want to be fully in and become champions, or allies as we call them, kind of went for that 8-hour 2 half-day training, and that was kind of a consistent flow. But I think the essentials piece, we expected a bit more bite, if you like. But actually what we got was the people manager piece. And what you recognize is that people are really looking for this because, anecdotally, I get the feedback, well, yeah, I am struggling in how to manage my team's well-being, or have a conversation with a team member who really wants to talk something which I'm not comfortable talking about. So that was kind of the kind of global offering, you like, open to anyone everywhere with no real approvals or things. So you just sign up and you turn up. And then also within our core kind of broader training programs, so not within the wellbeing agenda, but kind of general development programs that we offer as part of our organization, we have weaved a kind of these messages through that and make sure it's covered. So we've got kind of, in a longer day program, people are talking about sustainable high performance and what that means and how that conversation needs to be had. And then alongside that, our training also, we have kind of e-learning platforms, and there are a couple of modules with different providers and providing conversation cards and tools and support. So I think what we've done is try to give people different routes and access to training depending on what works for them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that whole thing around, having the choice, and I think it's really encouraging actually to hear that, your line managers, your people managers are looking for this training, and it doesn't surprise me, because we see and we hear that a lot and I think, the workplace has changed over the last sort
Yeah.
of 5-10 years, and and I think particularly younger generations coming in, there is a more of an expectation of being able to talk about these issues in the workplace. And sadly, we are living in a very turbulent and disrupted world, and these challenges are in the workplace now. So, I know people managers are just help me, give me the tools that I need to be able to respond and talk about these issues confidently. So, no, that's brilliant, and I hope you continue to see that level of engagement.
Yeah, so do we. Well, I mean, that's
Yeah.
there, so hopefully it carries on.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And we talk a lot about line managers, and today's session is absolutely focused on line managers. But it's not just about them. There is also, we need as organisations and leaders in organisations to support those line managers. And Jaan, just want to come to you. I mean, what do you think senior leaders can do to support this agenda and support the line managers in kind of promoting this kind of well-being first sort of culture?
Well, I think the work that Jyoti was just outlining is a really good blueprint of how to approach this thoughtfully, and not to just pick something off the shelf and start to try and fit it into your organization and its culture. There needs to be flexibility and an understanding of the people's needs, and then you can meet their demands as well. So that sort of no approval and at times appropriate to a global population training was part of that. I think when we step back and we look at our senior leaders and the more strategic response, then you can start to think about ensuring everyone understands the clarity of role, the expectations and accountability. So what do we want to see from you as our managers, and that being message communicated clearly and consistently, so that people feel confident and comfortable, and there's clear understanding around that, and that consistency piece we talked about as well. I think there's something around empowering people to understand that help-seeking behavior is a strength, is an asset as well, and the strong correlation there between mental well-being and high performance, or that sustainable, resilient high performance that we've touched on already. And that means that our senior leaders and our senior sponsors in particular need to be echoing and repeating that, not through their own behavior, but also through the decision making that they're doing at C-suite and around the board table as well. And also then that leads to an ability to lead with empathy, with vulnerability, with emotional intelligence, with self-awareness, all of those great characteristics that we're starting to see more in our high-performing corporate environments, because people understand that they are as important and core skills as all the technical ability and everything else that we've probably put more emphasis on in the past. And as you said in your introduction, Alison, we used to talk about this as soft skills, but actually now we're seeing these as just as valid and just as important skills for long-term success as well. And then I think the last thing, and it's really important, particularly in an environment that can feel as unpredictable as currently, is to ensure that there's the resourcing there as well, and the decision making that happens from our senior leaders enables that operational experience and the day-to-day experience between our line managers. And if we can ensure that the resourcing is there because we understand the business case and we know the impact it's going to be having, then I think there's a clear chain of command that can flow through and we can start to see the change happening.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And that's why I think, the role of senior leaders, is so important, because it's setting the tone, isn't it, across the organization and feeding down. And I think, in terms of our framework and, what we're hoping businesses will do, and that's why we talk about, compensation, performance reviews, it's really about, well, this is so important to us as an organization, that actually, we will be measuring line manager performance and rewarding line manager performance, with team wellbeing, front and center to that. So, in environments, I know at A&O Shearman, you have a very strong, senior leadership engagement and visibility. And quite often, Jyoti, what the things we hear from organisations is that they have introduced training, but the engagement is low. And I know we touched a little bit on this earlier, but what did you do? Because obviously you've had good engagement. What did you do really to encourage your people managers to engage in the training?
I'll be honest, it's work. It's not like they just turn up. And so we really had to kind of push it in different ways, and I will talk through that. And I think it's, the kind of overarching how this fits into the kind of business agenda, if you like, is really kind of important for the framing of it. So really thinking about sustainable high performance is what we talk about, and expecting that. And circling back to kind of my earlier point about line managers wanting to or people managers wanting to engage in this training, I think some of them probably engage on this for their own self-awareness. So we're kind of so entrained to say, oh, look after your team, and we know we're responsible for that, but actually they're building their own knowledge as well, and in a kind of subtler way, if you like, in a way they're more comfortable with. I'm doing this for my people, but really it's probably for themselves as well. So that's quite nice to see. I think in terms of the structure, when we kind of offered the kind of standalone training for people to engage with, we try to reduce as many barriers to sign up as we could. So one of them was the way we're structured is obviously different, but we have kind of central costs to cover some of our initiatives, and this is what we use some of the line manager training for. what that did do is also kind of spark local interest. So someone might have attended it, an HR, member from another organization, from another office, and said, actually, you know what, let's run this locally for our people because we've seen what it looks like and we think it would be great. We're really, and where we've done that in kind of a more nuanced way, whether it's the UK or Dubai where I'm based, we've worked with also getting it CPD accredited, which is kind of something lawyers are are required to do. So it's part of their training hours. So that kind of is a little bit of a hook for some people for trying to think of the couple of things. So we've got time, we have timekeeping responsibilities, or we, to have to allocate time. So we've got a charge code where people can put their time against it. And then honestly, just consistent and regular promotion. I genuinely, I don't think it's for the lack of want, it's just creating the space and nudging people. So from a central perspective, we will create some comms which say, this is what it's all about. And then we'll send it out to local teams and go, can you please, weave this into your comms? Can you please remind people that this course is there? We varied the time zone. So we know that some are going to be more kind of Asia centric, and some are going to be more US centric and UK centric, so that there is something for everyone to engage with. And I just think, I wouldn't say that it was like, it's still, it's an ongoing challenge. So it's never one of those job done, we've got the training, people can sign off if they want to. There is a lot of reminding and encouraging that goes along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. You can never communicate enough, can you?
I know.
With these things. There's a lot of noise in organisations, so I think that would certainly be, to those listening today, a really key message. Keep talking, keep communicating about it. You made some other really nice points there, and I think one is around accessibility. It's making it easy, isn't it, for people? So I know obviously the way you're structured, this is something that you've been able to offer from the kind of global resourcing. So it's not putting those barriers in at those kind of local levels, and then accessible in terms of regional nuance, because again it's really important, isn't it, that for a global organization, that when we're rolling out initiatives and programs like this, that it matters, or you're making it matter to local audiences, you're making it relevant to them. I love the CPD point. I think again it's thinking about the hooks, isn't it, around
Yeah,
what
I think you've got to
is going
talk
to
to
be important.
people. Yeah, what's gonna what's gonna get them in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it might be for organisations, again, listening today, that people that have attended, maybe it's worth asking the question of why, what prompted you to come along to this training, and using that feedback to perhaps think about how that can be promoted. No, that's brilliant. Well done, because I know you're doing incredibly well on the engagement front. And I know time, you referenced time, obviously being a challenge, and we work with really high performing kind of organizations, and I know people are very, very busy, and there are kind of high performance expectations, I guess, of line managers and teams. Jaan, I'd just like to come to you on this point around, how do you say, in terms of, how can managers kind of balance, I suppose, their sort of performance, or what we would think of as standard kind of performance expectations, which may be around hours work, targets, all those sorts of things, with leading in a compassionate and supportive way?
I think one of the first places to start is continuing with what you and Jyoti were just talking about. So asking people, and if we start with from the perspective as, what does healthy look like to you? What does success look like to you? What does a healthy, high performing, sustainable team look like to you? And then we can build out from there. We often come at these with the best of intentions and a lot of enthusiasm, particularly after we've started to taste the impact that our new skills development can have, and we forget to actually engage with others in the process as well. So I think any good leader or any good approach always starts with asking people and being genuinely interested in what the feedback is that comes as well. So that would be the first place I'd start. Also, by doing that, you're normalizing the conversation straight away. So you're reducing stigma, and you're saying that this is a conversation that we can make time for in a busy, high-performing environment where time is our one of the key drivers to where we place our focus and attention. This is a conversation that we can have. And I think that then leads me to my second point, which is, often people think, because we talk about apply the same business acumen, thinking, approach, etc., that this then has to become another business line, another stream to their work. And actually, it's often very straightforward and simple. It's good people skills in terms of creating the time to get to know people, having regular touch points and connection points, creating environments where people can understand the connection between high performance and mental well-being as well. So that point that we made earlier around disseminating and sharing and encouraging good information as well. And then taking an empowerment approach rather than I am the manager and therefore the sort of the oracle of all knowledge and will be here to save you in some kind of way. And again, I think people put their cape on and try and be very effective and helpful coming from enthusiasm, but actually what we know is going to create that sustainable long-term health in anyone is an ability to be able to make decisions, that agency and empowerment ourselves. And really what we're doing is we're creating an environment where, one, the line manager knows their people and knows what healthy or successful or good performance looks like, so that when they notice change, there's the ability to be able to step into that and explore what that might be. And secondly, we have the opportunity where we can weave in conversations around well-being. Now, this doesn't have to be concentrating on feelings all the time. It can just be, you know, what were some of the challenges we faced last week and what went well? How did we navigate ourselves through that? What are we feeling about the week that's coming forward? Or what are we looking at and what are some of the pinch points and challenges? That's just as much as an important well-being conversation as, you know, Jyoti, how are you? What's going on in your world? And so I think sometimes we overcomplicate it by thinking that we need to bring in some kind of pseudo sort of counselling skills or something, or if HR and people isn't our agenda, we suddenly need to take that on ourselves as well. And really, it's not. It's about creating environments where we can understand our people, where we can create a connected relationships that are appropriate and professional to the environment and the culture and the individuals that are within it, but allow us to understand and learn each other, that we know our baselines, or we know our people's baselines, so we can then notice change. And if that's positive change, we can celebrate it. And if that's someone pulling away in some way, then we can lean in and be curious and find out what they need. And then thirdly and lastly, we can encourage people to access the support and resources that they have. And a firm like A&O Shearman has a great suite of resources available, but enabling people to access that and reinforcing the point that these are confidential. Often they sit outside of the firm as well, so that people have got essentially 24/7, in most cases, access to credible professional information and advice at your fingertips, and often for wider family members as well. So encouraging people to take that avenue rather than feeling that their line manager has to have all the answers for them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think there's a few points there I'd just like to pull out. I mean, this kind of normalizing, reframing this. It's not, you know, I do, you know, often think about the line managers and, oh, here's another thing we want you to do, here's another responsibility. Well, actually, it is responsibility of those line managers anyway. It's just a normal part of the day-to-day job and just good people management. And like you say, if you can weave it into the way that you work, the way you communicate with your team, so it's not like, oh, I'm going to have a conversation about well-being now. It's just part and parcel of kind of the day-to-day, and that's ultimately, you know, what we want to see. So it's that kind of behavioural change. So Jyoti, coming back to you, I mean, what would you, in terms of the work that you've done, I mean, what would you say have been the biggest kind of shifts in behaviour or the impact you've seen from these sort of interventions?
Yeah, if we could measure behavior in organizations, we'd be, you know, be so much further along. But I think kind of taking on, I think what we've seen is the positive feedback from line managers. I think that, like, look, okay, anecdotally, everyone's kind of taken something away from training, translating that into day-to-day behaviors. It's really hard, honestly, to kind of gauge and measure. But I think if we take a holistic view of well-being and all the different initiatives that we kind of do and play into this, it's kind of, you know, we have seen kind of progress and an uptick in some of our uptake of benefits because we want to encourage that help-seeking behavior. We do see some kind of positive trends in terms of our engagement overall. But at the same time, I think, you know, going back to your point, it's that it's not putting it as an additional extra of something they need to do. So it's not pulling that out and going, right, how are we doing here? But really, how is it woven into the day-to-day conversations? How is the experience? And I had some really kind of positive anecdotes recently from like one part of the business where we're like, actually, in the kind of even partner reviews now, where, you know, we typically, you're really focused on financial performance and you're really focused on kind of how the business is doing, there was a little more conversation around how are you doing and what's happening in the broader sense, and getting to know your people. And I think that's what it is. And what we were saying before is, for some people that's fine, and people who experience that regularly with their line managers probably don't know another way. But till for some people who don't, it's understanding that, or don't feel as comfortable, that this is a skill that's easily learned like any other one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm being asked about this in my performance review. So I really need to think about, what I
How
need
I
to do. And if
am.
I need, yeah, exactly. And if I need some skills development, then it's there, which is great. And I'm really pleased that you've had positive feedback. I mean, I think that's great. But you mentioned help seeking behaviors. And I think, again, we talk about role modeling well-being behaviors, and it's almost just as important, isn't it? I mean, there's obviously that analogy around, on the flight, put your oxygen mask on first. So again, it's so important that, line managers understand their own well-being, how to spot the signs in themselves and keep themselves well. Because once you've learnt that skill, even just on an individual personal level, you can impart that knowledge to others and others in the team. So then thinking about recognizing the signs and I mean, Jaan, what are on a very practical level, I mean, what are some of the signs? So if they're line managers listening today, I mean, what should they be looking out for in their teams?
Well, I think again, often we go to the extreme. So we think of someone in our team that's getting very upset, very agitated, crying at work, sort of some kind of emotional expression of distress in some way, and clearly that will happen. But actually, it's often the subtle changes that we need to keep an eye out for as well. Now, that's really difficult to notice change if we don't know what baseline looks like, or we don't know what normal looks like, or we don't know what we're working towards. And again, to come back to that point, is that often with enthusiasm, we jump into these agendas without applying that same sort of logical business thinking that will create the results that we want. And what we want to do, starting off with, is define what good looks like, what success looks like, and where we're working towards. So having that conversation with people allows us to understand, and then we can notice change. And what we often talk about in the training is a spectrum of experience, from sort of thriving and healthy at one end to crisis and struggling at the other. And if we can think about thoughts, feelings, behavior, and physical, there are metrics as we go along. Now, really in the workplace, often it's behaviors and physical that we're going to notice more prominently than people's thoughts and feelings, which is great because they give us really good indicators of where people are at. So that'll be our performance of our work. And often we see that people's maybe the quality of their work drop, their timely responses, the way that they engage, how they engage, all of that can change in some way. And then often there's a physical element to this as well. You may see an increase, for example, in people having more headaches, or the way that they physically hold themselves, or the kind of IBS type problem or MSK type problems tend to rise up as well. So we may notice some of that. But the key point to all of this is, if you create an environment where you regularly check in with each other, and that doesn't have to be anything more formal than a conversation in the corridor as you walk to the next meeting, or the 2 or 3 moments you have before the actual video call starts to just check in with each other, or using instant messaging platforms or whatever your messaging platforms are internally. If that becomes the fabric, just how we do work here, which I know, I hear Jyoti talk about that a lot. This is just how we are, A&O Shearman. Then you'll start to get a real sense of your people, of where they're at, and they'll be far more open to be able to talk about it. You have to lead that, so it's about proactive dialogue as well. And there's a significant number of different models that we use in the various training programs as well. But if we get to know our people, if we stimulate that conversation, if we have good skills and knowledge ourselves, so we have confidence to respond to it, and we make it regularly part of our interactions, then we're going to start to notice the signs already. We do that when we see success and we celebrate it. So let's do the same when we see some of the challenges as well.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And, I think those frameworks are incredibly helpful because, again, even though you may have the skills training, some of these conversations are still difficult to have. So being able to have a framework, and to, in terms of, the listening and the types of questions that we ask. I mean, some people can shut people down just by the way they've phrased a question, and being able to know the kind of right questions to ask. I mean, even myself, having worked in workplace wellbeing for so many years, I sort of sometimes, if I'm having a conversation, I have to remind myself, oh, I'm going to phrase this question in that way, because that will give that person that space, you know, to hopefully open up and talk to me. So no, that's brilliant, Jaan. Thank you. So Jyoti, I know you're sort of, you know, this is an ongoing program at A&O Shearman. I mean, just thinking in the slightly longer term, I mean, what are you kind of looking to achieve, you know, through this kind of focus and investment of your line managers?
I think honestly more of the kind of positive behaviors seen. So we hear anecdotes and we hear positive stories and kind of really building on those. And I think to kind of, the point Jaan was making around it's just, normalizing the conversation. There should be, as normal as talking about the weekend, as an expression I heard once, in terms of how are you and how things are going, and really kind of building on that. So having that kind of open dialogue, open communication, and in a consistent way, if you like. So not just, oh, I've done the training and I'm going to put this into practice, and I've had my well-being conversation tick, but actually how it is happens more naturally and organically. And those are harder things to kind of see over a short period of time. So you've got to have a little bit of faith that the consistency and kind of going with it is going to make shifts over the longer term, which will be more visible. And I think part of the kind of persistence with the training, and maybe proven or maybe just our own perception, is that actually we are gonna, and we'll come, I'm sure, to talk about the kind of some of the things we are trying to measure a bit with our KPIs, but the number of people who've gone through training and had experience of this, there's got to be a tipping point where actually the more people who are familiar with this, the more people who experienced this and have the language to talk about it, the more you're going to see that kind of change in behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a normalizing, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
just the everyday conversations. So it's almost like this is not a thing anymore.
Yeah. We want to get to a
is
place where we don't need to do training on this, because this is how it works.
exactly. And yeah, and I'm sure you're well on your way, so good luck with that. We'll check in with you maybe a year's time and see how you're getting
Maybe
on.
a bit longer, Alison.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. But just reflecting back on, this was referenced a bit earlier, that time is often a barrier to this, and of course we know all of our people managers are very busy people. Jaan, is there any advice you could give a line manager about how they can support their teams in a very busy, time-strapped environment?
So I think, to Jyoti's point, it's touch points. So make one touch point with your people regularly, wherever that may be. If you're leading a large global team, then once a week it isn't realistic, but work out a plan of how you can create touch points for people, and then engage that as well. And most of us, with a bit of planning, we can create that environment. And by touch points, that doesn't mean that every conversation needs to be the length of a cup of coffee. It can literally be that, how are you, what you're doing, what's going on, and have some evidence up your sleeve as well. I really like the way you did that, Jaan, or I noticed that you were a bit quieter there, Jaan. Thought we'd just catch up and see how you're doing. We haven't had the opportunity to do that. When we ask each other, how are we, depending on sort of cultural reference points and personality and everything else, there's going to be lots of different responses to that. But if it's the first few times your leader, your manager, has ever asked you that, we're probably going to answer in the way that we always think is correct. I'm absolutely fine, thank you. I have capacity. I'm here and I'm ready. That's not really going to get us any further than an outcomes-based agenda of conversation that's clearly needed in the workplace. So being able to say, Jaan, I really like the way you did that meeting the other day, or I noticed X about you, and that's, you're often so vibrant there and you're a bit quieter. Let's put work to one side for a minute. How are you? What's going on? I value your input and I'd like to understand that more. So I think create those touch points is the first one. Don't think you have to reinvent the wheel. There's some brilliant resources out there. MindForward Alliance has got some wonderful training. There's some great toolkits already out there. There's some great free resources as well if you want to access those. And then obviously there's more in-depth training that people can go on as well. But utilize those. And if you're part of a firm like A&O Shearman, there will already be great thinking and knowledge within the firm. Reach out to those people. Utilize those delegation skills. Ask, what are the resources and the strategy behind this? What can I lift that's already happening, and just utilize that in my team as well? So that would be the second point. And then building on that, I would go out to your peers as well and ask them, what they've created already. How have you approached this, or what can we do collaboratively? How maybe can we share some and pool some of our resources and knowledge on this would be the final part. And then the last piece is consistency over scale, really. So it is that regularity of your behavior, and modeling that good behavior, which will, is the bedrock of psychological safety. And again, that's another phrase that's often used, and people think, this is a whole agenda and I'm going to have a whole new role to be able to do this. The reality is, to be able to create psychological safety, one of the simplest things we can all do is be consistent, be clear, and be open and interested in others. And if we can do that, we're creating the environment for people to thrive. And clearly, in any business environment, that's what we want our people to be able to do.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And just to add another question to Jaan, is that I suppose around the hybrid working environment, because that makes some of this a little bit more difficult, doesn't it? I mean, what does the future hold for line managers and managing the wellbeing of their teams in the kind of hybrid first world?
I think it's a really interesting space to come into, isn't it? We've learned a lot during COVID and post-COVID, and I think about how we can work effectively in these environments. And clearly our understanding and our expectations and our skill set has developed with that as well. I think the core basics still stay the same, though, whether we're practically in the same environment with each other or digitally. So that's about people first, about creating environments where relationships lead to good success. You mentioned earlier in your introduction, Alison, that we can spend over a third of our time at work. So let's create environments where people feel connected to each other, they have a sense of purpose, they have a sense of motivation, and that all comes through good leadership, which is simple, good people skills and consistency around that. I think we also need to think about a bit more around creativity as well, so that the systems and the processes that we use maybe are not going to be fit for purpose in a hybrid environment as well. So having that flexibility there, that agility there, and that creativity around it as well. And again, that often comes from just asking our people what's working well, and let's amplify that. And where are some of the challenges? What can we do to mitigate those challenges? And also, what can we have to put in the sphere out of our influence as well? And some of the things we have to accept. That's a key part as well around building mentally healthy teams, particularly leading it as a manager, is it's not your gift to try and change everything. That's clearly out of everyone's role as well. So having those clear upfront conversations with people about expectations, role, and what we can adapt as well. And then I think that the final piece is really around that value-driven leadership. So wherever we are or however we're working, in whatever environment that may be, our values are always the part that leads us forward as well. And from a global perspective, wherever we are in the world, we all work under those same shared values. And when we are part of a high-performing team, even if we're working hybrid, even if we're in an environment where we're not physically meeting each other, it will be the values approach that will enable us to all come to the same conclusions and be able to deliver on great work as well.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jaan. And just building on the sort of expectations, I guess, and setting expectations. I mean, Jyoti, I'd like to come to you now just to hear a little bit around how you as a firm have sort of started to sort of create those sort of expectations of line managers.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, so kind of the kind of the skills required, or what we've been talking about today, is really embedded in our existing framework. So it's kind of it exists within kind of our competency frameworks. It's endorsed by the we have a wellbeing advisory board that kind of oversees and steers some of this agenda globally, and we, so it's all kind of, it fits in, and then we have to provide, so we're expecting this of you, so here are the tools to support you to meet your expectations, I guess, is kind of the complementary of that. And we are trying to introduce a dashboard which kind of measures some of the elements of the wellbeing initiatives which kind of sit across different areas, but the training is one of them, and really looking at the percentage of people who have been trained and recognized in the last kind of few years, rather than kind of think, oh, I've had some training 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and that's probably still relevant. Actually keeping that fresh, so being better at tracking and monitoring that, so we know where we sit with this.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a large organization like yourself, keeping track of, is in itself a bit of a challenge. But
it feels like it should be easy, but you've got to develop a bit of a system around it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then in terms of, I'm conscious of time, and I'd like to. I see there's some questions in the Q&A. Jyoti, just to you, I mean, is there any kind of we like to focus on what works, obviously, as an organisation, but sometimes there are things that don't work quite as well. I mean, are there any lessons that you've learned along the way that you would like to share with everyone?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of always have to pivot. You can't think you've kind of got this, and kind of take on the feedback you've got. So I think for us, it's kind of let's ramp up a little bit on our people manager training, and we think maybe, ramp down on some of the other bits we have. And also kind of, I think there's an element of, a bit of short-termism, and sometimes they're thinking like, well, we've done this training for a year now, what can we see? And actually it's building in some patience and thinking about, right, we're not going to see results straight away, but be persistent and consistent with it, kind of knowing that we're going to have it. And even with the communication, just that we've got it there and launched and it's visible. People, we have attrition in our organization like any other organization. We need to kind of keep refreshing and reminding people what's available. And I think for me, kind of the next iteration of this journey in terms of kind of offering training is, talking about the kind of psychological safety, is we've kind of offered it to everyone anywhere, but actually thinking about more kind of tailored training for specific groups or specific offices, just because I think there's an element of cohesiveness that we could build through the training itself, and the kind of psychological safety, rather than not knowing who's going to be in your training. You're like, oh, they'll all be people who are part of the same group or team engaging this, and that will enable itself for richer discussion. So, you know, kind of on the people manager training, I think pivoting and reflecting what you've done and whether it's right or you've hit it right or not.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that providing, again, we're talking about the right conditions in the workplace and the team, but actually providing the right conditions in the training itself, so that
Yeah.
people are comfortable and can explore the topic in a safe way. So I'm going to move to questions now. We've got a few here. So I think this probably comes to you, Jyoti, first, and then but I'd welcome reflections from you, Jaan, as well on this. Are you being asked to demonstrate the return on investment of these trainings? If so, how do you respond?
I think not in a direct way. So I think there's kind of like, we know that the training will have an impact. We're not trying, it's very hard. And I think almost, yes, you can start to draw some numbers, and there's probably lots of research out there and things which really kind of directly relate back to your return on investment. But, drawing a direct correlation between this training and this profitability or this manager is going to be very hard, because it's so multifaceted. So thinking about it in a more holistic sense on our overall well-being agenda, and whereas, there is a lot of study and or research out there which will help you draw it back, but ultimately we position well-being as a driver of sustainable high performance. So if your team is performing, that's your ultimate kind of metric of the return on investment.
Yeah, thank you, Jyoti. And Jaan, any reflections from you?
I would agree. Set what you're looking to achieve and what does success look like, and then you can work your metrics from there, really. But creating a metric framework that's very difficult or ethereal to try and capture is only going to create more success, more frustration. Some of the metrics that are often used are around reputation as well, and positioning in the marketplace, particularly for early talent to come to. Engagement as well, and where our people are at any given time, and I think that's a key part of it. And then also I think an uplift in utilization of support and resources. Often they're highly underutilized, and you can see often a direct correlation from training programs or from engagement from managers, and then a utilization of resources as well. And a reminder, I know there's a question in there around psychosocial risk as well, but a reminder that all of this should be really focused around early intervention, rather than crisis response as well, which fits really well with Jyoti's point around sustainable high performance. We can create an environment where we can capture this early for the individual and organization if needed, and you're going to be far more likely to look at that ROI impact on the other areas than if we're only waiting till crisis point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we have an event for our members coming up later this year, really focusing on that prevention piece. And intervening upstream before things become problematic. So, you know, I think there is probably some ROI in terms of some data points, but it is about the experience, and that's quite hard to measure in numbers, isn't it? So, no, thank you for that. Jaan, this is probably quite a challenging question, so I might come on to you just to get your reflections, but we've got a question here about, if we accept that well-being in the workplace is primarily about the group environment, how do we deal with toxic relationships between the senior members of the group and motivate these members to work better together?
Oh, okay. Right. Well, I don't know in your individual environment, but I think we do what we've talked about for the last 50 odd minutes. Apply the same strategies that we know that work. So consistency is a key one. If there is an environment where the majority of people are reflecting the values of the organization, and that is coming through in their communication style, in their leadership style, in their planning, in the way that they deal with conflict and that conflict resilience, all of those will encourage similar behaviors from those around them. Their own expression of that, but their own similar behaviors, which then makes it much harder to be, you know, what's being defined in this statement here as toxic. Secondly, it's about having systems and processes that are robust as well. If we have in the receptions of our wonderful organizations, you know, we care about people, we value people, et cetera, but actually the environment that we see internally is that actually commercial success is the only point that we will lead on. And it doesn't really matter how we get there, and any kind of behavior is acceptable to enable us to achieve that, then there's a real incongruence there as well. So we need to have systems and processes that people can trust in, so that if there is situations where someone's behavior, again, to use the word that was used there, toxic, you know, bullying, whatever that might be, then there is a way of being able to address that effectively as well. And I think that's the next part of it. And then thirdly, if we want to build psychological safety, we need to think about who are we platforming, who are we enabling to progress through an organization, who are we celebrating? And if we, in our remuneration policies, are moving people forward that, again, our only factor is around their business success, we're going to miss out on the opportunity to say, and this is also what we think is great leadership or great people within the firm here or this organization, the way that they communicate, the way that they work with people, the way they bring others along with them, the way they make time to create those touch points and reflect our values in other ways as well. So I think there's an organizational conversation to have there. There's a very practical piece about making sure that your systems and processes are robust enough to be able to deal with these situations in the moment. And then the other part is around ensuring that the environment and the majority of the environment are living out the behaviors as well, so that they too can then call out what's been described as toxic and difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's also, you know, shifts between an employee market and employer market. But, you know, we are in the world of, you know, employee sentiment being published on, you know, platforms such as Indeed, Glassdoor, you know, and more transparency and requirements through regulation and, you know, where I think the behaviours, you know, of senior leadership teams which influence the culture across the organisation are, you know, there's more accountability, I guess, is what I'm saying around this. And, you know, there will be different levers to pull, whether that's bottom up, you know, or externally on this particular topic. It's also worth looking, there was a piece of work done by the McKinsey Health Institute, which was actually looking at burnout in the workforce. And of course, you know, when you're having conversations, you know, people instantly think, oh, it's about the hours, it's, you know, long working hours, but actually it was toxic workplace behaviors which was the leading cause of burnout in organizations. So there is evidence and data there, you know, around that, and definitely worth having a look at that. I've got another question here. How can managers support the well-being of their teams when there is constant restructuring, headcount, cost constraints, which impacts everybody, employees, either indirectly or directly? Now, we're all in organisations where costs, you know, are consistently being looked at, and obviously there are lots of changes and transformation, and you know, in some organisations, you know, headcount reductions. I mean, Jyoti, I wonder if I could just come to you on this, you know, question.
Yeah, I mean, just from reflections from you, I'm thinking you can support well-being. It's free to support everyone's well-being, in terms of your conversation and how you interact with them. And it's that kind of circle of control that kind of comes into my mind when we talk about something like this, because it's thinking about, the world is uncertain. There's a lot of change. There's a lot of kind of, bigger things, macroeconomic things that are happening across us, internal organizational restructures. But I think thinking about when we think about kind of how we support, employees through change, it's not that we can control many of these things, but how do we support them to accept change in their mindset and in terms of how we interact with them, and how do we deal with them with compassion or sympathy or empathy, recognizing there are factors beyond control. So I think that kind of thought process of like, you need a program to sort well-being. Yes, there are programs that can enable it, but actually your conversations that we've been talking about throughout kind of this last hour can just, and that openness, authenticity, whatever words kind of resonate with you to be that kind of line manager is what would help in these circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's about the communication, isn't it, and the engagement with the teams. I mean, these are realities, and realities for most organisations, and of course, change can bring that kind of uncertainty and that anxiety about what's happening. But just having very honest and open conversations about what that means and how people are feeling, and if they require additional support, where to get it, is really what we're looking for here. So, if anything, that is the case for training your line managers, because actually they're having to deal with this throughout their roles as line managers. So yeah, thank you, Jyoti. Last question, and again, this is for you, Jyoti. It's a real struggle getting senior leaders to prioritise the development of these kind of softer skills. How has your organisation been able to approach this challenge in very practical terms? What have you done, and how did you do it? The business case are well known, but getting leaders to listen is still tough.
I mean, I would agree, but yes, I think inherently a number of leaders, especially in kind of multinational large organizations, which I'm assuming, a number of people here, but they kind of get it conceptually and intellectually. They know it's important because there's enough to kind of say, we talk a lot more about, I think, sustainable high performance. We could interchange that for well-being, but we recognize we don't shy away from the type of industry or our expectations or what we want of our people. We know it's high pressure and high performance, and we think that can coexist alongside well-being. So once you kind of start, and it's a consistent message, and in a large organization, you kind of also accept you're not going to convince everyone, okay? Like, there's going to be varying views and different views on that spectrum, but that's kind of the consistent messaging. And we talk a lot about kind of prevention and proactive. Actually, for many of us, we don't want to hit that crisis point. Yes, it happens, but actually the more we can think about, we're preventing and thinking about and engaging with our leaders on that message and saying, like, this is about preventing crises in the first place, and that's why we need to engage with it. And there's loads of figures out there about kind of the cost of poor well-being, so if those help. And I think kind of generally, kind of to close that, in terms of leadership in general, we've had to kind of need to know who you're talking to and use different approaches. I think for some people it's just simply it's the right thing to do. For other people, you kind of need to talk to the numbers. We talk a little bit about risk and compliance because there's a lot there in our industry. We're regulated in our expectations of us, and it's really finding the right hook and varying that to kind of persuade your leadership, if you like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one sort of last reflection from me on that would be that, if we just look at the numbers purely around, people experiencing mental ill health, if you are a person that has supported someone, if you haven't experienced it yourself, it's 1 in 2. So you will no doubt have somebody close to you, whether that's family, friends,
Yeah.
colleagues, who will have experienced mental ill health. And so we all have our own human stories, I guess. And, it's finding ways to connect, with people on that kind of more human level. So it's not just about being a senior leader in an organization.
Yeah.
You're a person, and this is a topic that will affect you, and trying to sort of bring out some of those conversations. And what we've seen works quite well, we run executive masterclasses for leadership teams, is actually starting the conversation around the human story, because I think when people sit back and reflect and think about themselves as human beings rather than just senior leaders of organizations, it does bring a different layer to this, and I think can help to think about how we can bring that a bit more into the workplace. I'm conscious of time. It is 10 o'clock. I just want to say a huge thank you to you both, Jyoti and Jaan, for today and for this conversation. I can see from the chat that people were scribbling down very quickly all of the insights. We've shared some of the resources on the chat, our Thriving at Work framework, the Deloitte insights that I mentioned earlier, and also some information about the training that we run. So please do take a look. I wish you all the very best for the rest of your day, and thank you very much for joining us.